How much time do you spend creating your world building for your contemporary fiction novels? So I'm not talking about fantasy or sci-fi, but you're just writing about the everyday world that you live in. How much time do you spend creating that world and building up the world that your character lives in? If you don't spend much time creating that world, then you're going to want to listen to this video. Today we're going to talk about why it's important for contemporary fiction writers to spend as much time creating their world as they do creating their characters and the plot. You have a story to tell, but you don't know where to start. Let me show you how to free your story. I teach you how to write and how to dig deep in your soul to release your story and make a difference in the world. Welcome to the Julie Amante channel. If we're just meeting, I am Julie Amante. I'm a women's fiction author. And today we're going to talk about world building, specifically for writers who write general fiction or contemporary fiction. So other writers like fiction writers or sci-fi writers or any other writer who creates kind of an alternate world or universe really needs to focus on creating that other world, because it's obvious, right? The readers need to understand the rules of that world and what happens differently than the world that they're used to. So, but a lot of us who write contemporary fiction might feel that that's really not necessary because, you know, we all live in this world. We all know what the rules are, and we all know what life is like. We don't really need to create it because we all live in it. And that's actually a misconception. Okay, so we're going to talk about that. Now, I'm going to tell you a story now. A few years ago, actually it's been like maybe 15 years ago, quite a while ago. When I first started writing, I took a class in UCLA with David Freeman, and it was about writing fiction, and so I went there. It was over a long weekend, and I just went because he had a good reputation, and the class had a good reputation. I thought, okay, I'm going to go and find out see what he has to say. And so when I went there, one of the things that I noticed was that he was talking a lot about world building and how important it is. And I learned a lot in this class. I learned probably more in this class this weekend than I had learned in, previous years of actually studying and reading about fiction, because he explained things in sort of a different way. And what I found out really was that he's a screenwriter. So he was talking to screenwriters. So looking at story building in a different way, looking at it through the lens of a screenwriter rather than just a novelist. So I think that really opened up my eyes. If you think about the way that screenwriters and the way that producers and the way that movies are created, they spend as much time on creating the setting as they do with the story, right? As they do with the plot of what's happening in the story. They spend a lot of money building sets and getting all that ready because it is so important to the story. You can't just put the characters anywhere, right? They're not interchangeable. You can't just say, okay, well, I'm just going to scrap this setting and we're not going to have this story take place on a ranch. We're just going to actually move it to Boston and see how it does there. If you can do that, if you can just move your story and your characters to a different setting and it doesn't change anything, it doesn't impact the story, then you haven't spent enough time creating your world. Okay. The other thing that I found that was really interesting in that class, it was a big auditorium. So it was at UCLA. So it was one of their big auditoriums, and it was full. It was full of writers. So I was like, wow, okay, this guy has some interesting things to say, I'm sure, because there's so many people. But the people were interesting too. And as I was talking to some of the other students that were there, I found out that a lot of the people that were there were actually gamers. Okay, so again, this was like 15, 18 years ago. And, I'm not a big gamer. I don't know a lot about games. And, my experience was like playing Pac-Man, right? So little shooting games. I had no idea that games were so intricate and that there were all these stories that happened within the game that you have to get into. Now I kind of know that a little bit more because I actually have teenagers and my own kids, and I see how involved it was. But back then I was really kind of shocked that these gamers wanted to know about storytelling. But they also wanted to know about world building because they build the world that these characters inhabit. So it was very interesting. It was very interesting. I learned a lot about world building. And when I got home and I started looking through my own work and my own novels, I realized that even though I wasn't creating games and I wasn't creating fantasy novels, I really needed to pay attention to this idea of world building, because world building is not just the place. Okay, it's not just the location. It is everything that happens in the location. It's the, the atmosphere, it's the weather, it's the things that happen in that location. It's the sort of the vibe of the neighborhood or the friends that the main character lives with. So it's everything that where this character lives. This is the character's life, right? The character's world. And there's also cultures, right? We have subcultures. So let's say that this character works at a university. The university has its own subculture, and that needs to be present in the story. Same thing, let's say the character works somewhere else, at a hospital, works at a restaurant. Every place is going to have sort of its own subculture and vibe, and that needs to be part of your world, and you need to build that in there. Okay, so let's talk about the other elements that are involved as well. Okay, so let's talk about character. Okay, so our main elements to create a story are going to be your character, your plot, and your setting. So the setting is, like we mentioned, it's that world that the main character inhabits. But let's talk about character, okay, for a second. Even though we're talking about world building, let's talk about character for just a second. Your character is definitely the most important part. People have different opinions, right? Some people say character, some people say plot is the most important. But it's the character story, and for the sake of world building, the character is super, super important, because we are only going to experience the world and the setting through this character's eyes. Okay, the character is the one that takes us through this world. And the way that the character feels about the setting, the way that the character sees it, the experiences that the character has in your world, is how the reader is going to see the world and interpret it. Okay, so we only get to see the world through this main character's eyes. Now there are other characters too. We have secondary characters. We have other walk on, walk off characters. And we are going to see the world through their eyes as well. I mean, it just depends on the point of view that you're writing from, right? So if you're writing strictly from one character's point of view, you're really only going to see the world through this one character's eyes. But you can also notice the way the other characters act in that world, and then that gives you, right, a perspective. It gives you sort of an impression of what that world is like. But most of the time, you're going to see it through that main character's point of view. So you need to make sure that you're creating a world where this character belongs or doesn't belong, right? Depending on what you want to show about the environment. So if you're creating and again, we're talking about contemporary fiction here, so it's happening in real time. It's happening right now. But everything about that environment is something that the character is going to experience. So if there are environmental issues, if there's something going on that impacts the world, the society, the character is going to be affected by that as well, right? So we need to make sure that that. Like, so it's like when you're going through the setting, what do you want to include? Like, one of the questions that agents and editors have been getting right now is how much COVID stuff do we put in there, or do we put it in there at all? Do we add things about social distancing? Do we add things about masks and things like that? And what a couple of the agents I talked to one of them who said, no, that the editors are really not wanting that right now, because I think we're all hoping it goes away really soon, and you don't want to date your book. So if you're having the characters all wear masks, and 6 months from now, hopefully we are not anymore, we don't have to do that, it's, we're going back to a normal world, it's going to seem really bizarre. And it's also, and she said something like, and And you can go back, I actually have the video recorded in one of my videos, past videos, where she said something like, we're kind of hoping this nightmare ends and we don't have to think about it anymore, right? So, and that's the truth, right? So we're kind of hoping we can move past this. And unless you're writing sort of a history of back in 2020 or back in 2021, then you don't want to add that into your current, everyday story that you're writing. But it really depends. And one of the things that actually I was going to talk about, another element, which was just other thing to add in there, was sort of the larger history in society. How much of that do we want to add to our story? And it really just depends on your story. If you are going to actually release your book, you're writing it and you're going to release it on your own. It's not going to a traditional publisher. It's not going to sit there for 12 months to 18 months, but you're going to actually write it and get it all edited, and it's going out next month, or it's going out in 2 months, and we are still living in this COVID world, and you're thinking, okay, I want to add that in here because this is happening now. I mean, it's up to you how you want to do that, but those are things that you want to consider. How much of the real world do I want to put in there? Do I want to add current societal stuff into my book, or am I not doing that? Okay, so another thing about kind of the environment and how the character is going to interact in this environment is that you can, even though you are writing about the real world, you can invent things in your real world. Okay, so you can have, let's say the character works at the university, right? If the character works at the university, it doesn't have to be a real university. You can make up the university, and it could have its own name, it could have its own, and it's not going to have its own rules. It's going to run the way a university runs, because it's not, we are writing about the real life. But you can create something fake. In my previous 2 books, the one that's going to be released soon and the previous one, it takes place in a fictional town. The town does not exist. I did base it on real towns close to where I live, but it's not a real town. It's a fictional town. So the name it's got its own name. The street names are different. However, it exists within the real world of Southern California. So my character drives out to the airport and goes to a real airport that really exists in the real world. However, her little town and the homes there and all the things that are there are not real, because I made it up, right? I made up this fictional town. So even though it takes place in today's world, it is contemporary fiction, you can still create things within your real world that has your own, spin on it. So as you begin to plot your story, as you begin to create your story, when you're just starting out and you're just starting to plot it, my recommendation is for you to take all 3 of the elements, to take the setting, the plot, and the character, and create it all at the same time. So understand real well what your world is going to be like, who's going to exist in this world, and who is going to be part of your character's world. So when we're talking about characters, right, one of the things too is that you want to think about what are the characters are going to be part of this story. So who's going to inhabit this world along with your main character? Your main character isn't going to be there alone. So part of the things that typically writers will think of is like, okay, well, I know that it's a romance, so there's going to be a love interest, and maybe he has a family, so that family's going to be part of the story, and her family's going to be part of the story. And maybe there might be a couple of other people, but that's about it, right? We think about these sort of main characters, the secondary characters, and we think of those are the people that are going to be part of the world, but we forget that we want to inhabit the whole world. Like, let's say that the character goes to the grocery store, okay, and is shopping for something, or runs in there to get some salsa to bring home and make some dinner for her son. You can have that scene be that way, right? She can go in there and grab the salsa and go and pay for it and run out, and you can never actually acknowledge that there are other people. But it's weird, and it doesn't make the scene come to life. And it doesn't mean that you have to actually have her interact or talk with other people, but just acknowledge that there's other people there. You can say something like, she ran in and noticed that it was super busy, and she really just wanted to get this one can of salsa, but she navigated around the other carts, the other people's carts, and grabbed the salsa and got into the long line. And so it gives us the feeling that there are other people there. So she's not just, randomly going into this void and grabbing the salsa and then running out and paying and running out, right? There are other people there. And so as long as we acknowledge it, or maybe there aren't a lot of people, maybe she can just notice that she walked into this grocery store and wow, thank God there's only 4 or 5 other shoppers here at this time, so she can quickly grab it. So something that acknowledges that there are other people living in this world with her, that she's not alone, right? So think about that. Think about when you're first creating it and you're thinking about the plot, writing down the plot, and you're creating your world, who is going to be there. Now you may not know. You may think, okay, well, I'm just kind of creating the major plot points. I have no idea about the scene I haven't even created the scene at the grocery store yet. I don't even know that that's going to happen yet. So how am I supposed to create these other characters? So that's okay. I mean, some people really just want to focus on one element at a time. They might want to I'm just going to do the plot. This is the major plot point, and then I'm going to see which characters are going to be part of each scene or each chapter, and then I'm going to layer in the world. You can do that, but don't wait too long to do that. Okay, so you want to make sure that you really, really understand the world before you start to write, at least. So as you're creating or as you're planning your novel, it's okay to do one element at a time, but keeping in mind that you need to weave these all together before you actually start writing. Otherwise, you're going to write scenes and you're going to write chapters, and then you're going to find, as you go back and to read, that it feels like there's something missing. It doesn't feel realistic. There's something missing, and what's going to be missing is going to be that world that is not there. Okay, so you want your character to be part of something larger. You want to make it as real as possible. This is part of the reason that even though I have a fictional town, I do have my character go out into the real world and have these sort of landmarks, or have things that, as people are reading, they can attach themselves to it. I think the coolest thing is if the reader is reading your story and says, where is this town? Let me Google this town and see if it exists. If your reader does that, then wonderful, because what you've done is you've made your reader think, you've written it so well that your reader actually thinks that this place is real. Okay, and it really isn't, but you've made it feel so real that the reader thinks it exists, and that's what you want. Okay, so that's what you want it to seem real, even if it doesn't exist. Now, if you use a real place, though, okay, so if you use Los Angeles, a certain part of Los Angeles, or whatever, right, then what you want to make sure that you're doing is that you're accurate, that you research, and if the person is walking down a certain street, what is there? Because even though things change, stores change, and all that, people that live there or people that visit there are going to expect it to be real, because you've told them that it is, right? You've told them that the person is walking down whatever street, right, Beverly Hills, and you want it to be accurate. You want it to look accurate because people are going to expect that. So if you're using a real location, make sure that you are accurate about what's there. I feel like I have a hair on my face, and okay, so make sure that it's accurate, and make sure that you are that you do your research, okay? Because we're writing about real places and people are going to expect it to be real. If you're writing about fictional places, then don't worry about it. But if you're writing about real places, make sure that it's correct. Okay, so what you want to do is remember then that you want to have those 3 elements. You want to weave them together before you start writing your story, and that each one has an impact on the other. Okay, so your world is going to have an impact on the character. The character is going to have an impact on that world. That both obviously will have an impact on the plot and how the plot develops. Okay, so keep that in mind, and I hope this has been helpful. If it has, then please hit the like button and the subscribe button, and then I will see you again next Friday.